Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines. That's right, it's the 2010 Techie 10K, a fundraiser for the TAG Education Collaborative that is full of excitement, fellowship, and, well, good old competition, from the fastest C-level runner to who can beat the TAG CEO. Plus, place awards for first, second, and third prize for both corporate and individuals. Then there's the all-important 2010 Team Corporate Cup. It all happens October 2nd, and it's all brought to you by our Goal Race sponsor partners at Ministaff and Carlytics. For details, visit tagonline.org, and then look under events, and then register today for the 2010 Techie 10K. Vroom. Sure, everybody's talking about it now. In fact, experts say it's the hot topic of the day and of the future, cybersecurity. But did you know that over 12 years ago, right here in Atlanta, an information security center was established that is now supporting over 100 faculty and graduate students working on a broad range of research projects including cryptography, virtualization and trusted platforms, storage systems and network security, the international dimensions of cyber attacks, and the national strategies and forms of international cooperation. Introducing, well, kind of, one of our local technology industry's little-known, global leading research and state-of-the-art teaching laboratories, all focused on understanding threats to digital information and in developing strategies for securing cyber information. It's the Georgia Tech Information Security Center, GTISC. Greetings, everyone. It's Thursday, September 30th, 2010, and this is a special summit edition of Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. I'm your guest host, Frank Baia. GTISC, twice designated as a Center of Excellence in Information Assurance Education by the National Security Agency, has scholarships funded through the National Science Foundation and research projects supported by grants from the Army Research Office, National Science Foundation, and DARPA, as well as a broad spectrum of industry. Now, mark your calendars. The 2010 GTISC Security Summit will be held on Thursday, October 7th, with a lineup of stellar keynote speakers and industry panelists. The theme, the evolving nature of cybersecurity threats. Here to give us an overview, both on the center and on the upcoming summit, Patrick Traynor, an assistant professor in the College of Computing at Tech, a member of the GTISC, and a co-director of the Converging Infrastructure Security Laboratory. Effective information security in the real world, user content solution, and the integration of technology research and policy research as the Tech Talk investigates cybersecurity with tech expert and academic researcher Patrick Traynor. Patrick, welcome to Tech Talk.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on the program with you today.
I truly can't think of a more exciting subject that everyone seems to be talking about, cybersecurity. First, tell us a little bit about what you do and what your involvement is over at Georgia Tech.
Well, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Computer Science here at Georgia Tech, and my research interests are broadly about network security, but in particular, I'm interested in the security of mobile phones and mobile networks.
And, of course, I can only imagine with wireless and the number of new appliances and the complications of data that are becoming more and more used in transferring using that appliance, that situation's got to become even that much more critical.
Absolutely. It's certainly keeping me busy.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, the evolution. I think in the news in the last couple of days there's been a lot of conversation about a backdoor to the Internet and the government getting involved in more of their own concerns about security. Maybe you can give us a kind of a perspective in terms of the subject. Surely I can't make a judgment as we're better off or worse because I think the situation's become more complicated, say, over the last 10 years. But give us kind of a perspective of where things are today as far as security is concerned, where they were just a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great place to start. It's hard to look at the headlines these days without seeing something dangerous in terms of security, whether it's new phishing attacks or it's botnets that allow someone to maliciously control potentially millions of compromised computers across the world, or even this week we heard about the Stuxnet worm, that was the first to actually target SCADA control systems. So this worm appears to actually target power systems in electrical infrastructure. So it's really hard not to look at all the news and think only bad. But like you said, it's really a matter of perspective, and it's important to understand that so much of our world has come online in just the last 10 years, whether it's the fact that we all carry mobile phones, and those mobile phones can do very interesting things. They can, give us access to email, let us access the internet in general, whether it's the fact that we now rely on social networking as one of the primary means of communicating between friends and colleagues, or again, whether it's the fact that the electrical grid is really part of the larger internet. So much has come online that there are certainly more opportunities for malicious behavior. The good news is that at least people are more aware of these problems. Security really was only in its infancy 10 years ago, and now we're able to apply more principled approaches to the problem. So while we're certainly by no means able to solve a lot of these problems yet, it really gives me a lot of hope that the defensive efforts that we're working on and other folks across the world are working on are really finally receiving the attention that they require. So certainly there are more things that are vulnerable because more things are online, but at least everyone's paying attention.
It may be a naive perspective, but do you actually consider in the evolution of any kind of new programming, new software, obviously you've built in a level of security, but you can't anticipate innovation, and innovation can be from an evil standpoint as much as it can be from a good standpoint in terms of challenges to the software. I guess it's got to be an immense complication to mix security into the actual productivity of what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. So we sort of say as one of our first lectures to students that you need to build security in. Well, that's a nice high-level concept, but actually figuring out what that means, and
really?
like you said, figuring out what evolution is going to look like is very, very difficult. So sometimes it's easy, but sometimes when a system becomes more popular than intended and is used across many different environments, possibly those that were never intended for its use, security becomes very, very difficult.
Well, and on one hand, you've got what used to be internal networks, and of course now you've got the clouds and everything as you're talking about being digitally connected from a broadband wireless network. Now they're talking about a smart grid as it relates to, you were mentioning earlier about utilities and certainly the financial industry. I mean, it just on and on and on, and the levels of complications and the possible areas of challenge. I won't say threat because some of the cases it's not just malicious as it relates to, say, terrorism, but it also has to do with greed. I know in the financial industry they often talk about literally what we used to think of armed robbery. I guess it's virtual armed robbery in terms of money's being taken without anybody even realizing it's happening.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's really become part of the cost of business.
Interesting point.
Yeah.
Wow, that's an interesting point. One last real quick thought on my side. I saw a package, as they call it in the media business, on 60 Minutes or something, and they were actually showing where a terrorist, where they were doing it as a practice, could break into a system and literally tell a generator to blow itself up in a power plant. That it wasn't even a complication of, say, breaking the distribution grid, but literally impacting computer directions in the operations of something. So it's an amazing matrix. My mind goes to 3 levels Star Trek chess, and I think this is going to be 30 levels Star Trek chess. Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned mobile phones earlier. I think in some cases it's pretty obvious why security is important with those issues, but maybe touch a little bit deeper on that. Tell us a little more about the security for mobile phones and why is it more important now than it's been ever before?
Well, certainly, and I think the numbers really help clarify this. So I would say that your audience would agree with me when I say that the Internet's a pretty big deal, and about 1.5 billion people log on to it every single day. Well, it turns out that across the planet, there are over 5 billion subscribers to cellular networks. And when you think about it, cellular networks are the only digital systems the vast majority of the population across the planet are ever going to interact with. And when we talk about the next big expansions of the Internet, those are the systems that are going to bring it to the wider world.
Mm-hmm.
So for the business members of your audience, when they're thinking about how is it that I reach into these new markets, how do I target new areas of the planet, these are the systems that matter. Now, start to think about what your mobile phones can do for you and some of the thoughts that people have had for them. So certainly now, if I lost my mobile phone, someone would have access to my email. But a number of people have proposed the idea of, say, carrying your medical records on your mobile phone, which would be wonderful if you had an emergency. But again, if you lost that phone, or if that phone became the target of an adversary, there's so much information, so much important, sensitive, contextual information that they hold, that protecting them and the networks that support them is absolutely critical.
Again, it's amazing. You can take any one of these areas and mine it into, I think, a fascinating discussion. I know a few years back we were talking with some people that were doing business internationally, and they were talking about even in third world country in some of the most remote areas, they may not have drinking water, but they have a mobile phone. And that they, in fact, in some cases, the government provides them with the phone just as a form of communication. Another point is that just recently I heard they're being used for GPS, and that the government, there's some even legislation that's up talking about using the phone to keep track of where you are, which gets also into a privacy issue as well. So the levels of, we say layers and tentacles of that subject has got to be an immense study, and I can see why you'd be fascinated and committed to that particular focus, because it is so dynamic.
Absolutely. And you're certainly right on the first one. I have a colleague who was visiting India a number of years ago, and he was in a very rural area, and there were farmers dressed in sort of the traditional dress that their ancestors had worn for hundreds of years, but they were text messaging each other. And the reason why was because they were trying to determine which market to bring their goods to, so that they wouldn't show up somewhere so that there'd be too much wheat or too much whatever the crop was.
So now you're even talking economics and
exactly.
Amazing. Well, again, the evolution and the speed of the evolution of the mobile phone and being used for so many different reasons, and you were mentioning medical records and even your cell phone information. A friend of mine who's a pretty high-level CTO was mentioning the other day that his phone was either lost or stolen, and they had a app that allowed him to clear the information off of that phone by a remote control capability of some kind or another. So you're far ahead of us, and I'm sure you're hearing and seeing and experimenting with things, excuse me, that we hadn't even considered. Let's maybe move just quickly along, because we've unfortunately out of time. I'd like to make maybe another opportunity to invite you back to Tech Talk to get into maybe a specific discussion just about the future of mobile phones. It could be pretty fascinating, I think. But let's talk about the impact of the economy on these things. As far as attacks are concerned, strong economy, weak economy, does it make a difference? Has the recent downturn in the economy led to any increase in attacks?
Yeah, there are certain kinds of attacks that increase when the economy is in a rough spot. And one is good old-fashioned wire fraud. So people calling up other people and trying to convince them to give them access to their bank accounts. It seems very, very simple, but it's still a very effective attack. So just last week, I had someone from a bank call me and say, congratulations, Dr. Traynor. We appreciate you doing business with us. And before we go forward, would you just give us your Social Security number? And I think it was my bank, but I didn't. I said, listen, I kind of do this professionally. How on earth am I supposed to tell who you really are? And so we kind of hit a stalemate, and I said, listen, thank you for the call, but maybe I'll call you back later. Most folks don't even think about it when their bank calls and says, hey, listen, we need to talk. By the way, prove you are who I think you are. And so Georgia Tech is actually focusing on this right now with some work called call provenance determination. And we're trying to figure out who it is that's actually calling you based on the audio of the call. And that is, we can actually tell the networks that a phone call passes through, because each of those networks leaves little artifacts of itself in the call. And so this gives someone who's receiving a call some evidence of whether or not they've spoken to this entity before.
Pretty amazing stuff. I mean, I'm old enough to remember party lines on telephones, and I thought that was a complication. Let's talk real quickly, because we're unfortunately running out of time, about the Georgia Tech Information Security Center. And I know you guys are having an upcoming summit. Maybe give us a little bit of insight about that. Is that something that is of interest to the public, general public, as it relates to the technology community, and how do they get access to information about it?
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to point everyone to www.GTISCSecuritySummit.com. Every year, Georgia Tech takes leaders from industry, government, and academia, and we get together and we have a conversation about the state of security and the evolving nature of cybersecurity threats. So this year we have folks from all over, from Barracuda Networks, Endgame Systems, from the U.S. Military Academy, and we're going to talk about what the big threats are and what we see as the big issues that all three of those areas, again, government, academia, and industry, should be focusing on in the next 12 months. So I encourage everyone to go to that website, register. Registration is free, and all the details are there. It'll be this coming Thursday, October 4th. By the way, this is also part of a larger Future Media Fest that's going on at Georgia Tech this week. And that's going to be Monday through Wednesday. Again, I'm going to point everyone to the website for that. That's futuremediaga.com. And that'll tell people about the larger sort of activities that Georgia Tech and tech businesses in the Atlanta area are undertaking right now. Everything from healthcare to gaming and, of course, security.
Pretty amazing stuff. A lot of things happening. We used to talk about dynamic fluidity. Now I think it's phantasmagoric as far as the speed of things and the change of everything that's happening. Patrick, in your area, thank you so much for sharing so much of your information with us, and thank you for joining us today on Tech Talk.
My pleasure. It was great to be on the program.